You are listening to File '07. Now, put on your headphones, turn off the lights, and brace yourself for terror. The rain fell relentlessly over New York as I drove through the dark streets of the Lower East Side. My radio crackled with the dispatcher's gravelly voice. Detective Parker, homicide at 247 East Broadway, apartment 5B. It was 3:17 in the morning. And this would be my 30th case of the year, but something told me this one would be different. Maybe it was the way the raindrops seemed to whisper against the windshield, or that cold sensation creeping up my spine every time a flash of lightning split the sky. The building was one of those old red brick structures, with a rusted fire escape twisting up its facade like a metal scar. Officer Johnson was waiting for me in the lobby, his youthful face looking paler than usual under the fluorescent lights. "Detective Will Parker," he said, swallowing hard. "You need to see this." As we climbed the stairs, the familiar smell of death grew stronger. But there was something else in the air, a metallic odor that wasn't blood, mingled with a sweet fragrance that reminded me of jasmine. Sarah Mitchell, 23, an aspiring artist, lay on her Persian rug like a broken doll. Her blue eyes, still open, reflected the flash of the forensics team photographing the scene. Blood had formed strange patterns on the rug, almost as if they were symbols, but the most disturbing thing was the mirror. It was an antique piece, oval-shaped, with an ornate darkened bronze frame. It was shattered into exactly 7 pieces, arranged around the body like rays of a macabre sun. Cause of death appears to be multiple lacerations to the neck and torso. Dr. Rachel Cooper, our medical examiner, reported, pointing to the deep, precise cuts. But Will... She hesitated, lowering her voice. "Here is something odd here. The cuts, they look like they were made from the inside out." I leaned in closer. She was right. It was as if something had exploded from within the victim's body. On the walls, we found scratch marks, some forming incomplete words. One of them, I could barely make out. Reflection. Return. I spent hours at the apartment, collecting evidence, photographing every detail, interviewing neighbors. No one had heard anything. No one had seen anything. The apartment had been locked from the inside when the police arrived, called by a worried friend who hadn't been able to get in touch for 2 days. By the time I finally made it home, it was well past 2 in the afternoon. Exhausted, I collapsed on my bed without even taking off my shoes. That's when the nightmare started. In the dream, I was in Sarah's apartment, but everything was different. The furniture floated on the ceiling. Gravity made no sense. And there she was, standing in front of the intact mirror, brushing her long red hair. "You are too late, detective," she said, her reflection showing a face twisted in terror as she kept smiling at me. "They're coming back through the mirrors. And you are the key." I woke up screaming, covered in cold sweat. With shards of glass scattered across my room, my bathroom mirror had exploded. 3 days after Sarah Mitchell's death, I still couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, her distorted smile in the mirror of my nightmares. That's when the phone rang. "Parker, we've got another one," said Captain Thompson's tired voice. "Upper West Side, 82nd and Columbus." As I drove, I noticed the temperature had dropped drastically on a June night. My car was reading 45 degrees Fahrenheit. Emily Watson, 27, a piano teacher, lay in her studio surrounded by blood-stained sheet music. The same pattern. A broken mirror in 7 pieces, inexplicable cuts, apartment locked from the inside. But there was something new on the walls, written in a tortured hand. The reflection shows the way back. Dr. Cooper knelt beside the body, her face a mask of concern. "Will, the cuts are identical to Sarah's, and here is more. Look at this." She pointed to the victim's hands. Microscopic shards of glass were embedded beneath her nails. As the forensics team scoured the apartment, a sudden dizziness hit me. The walls seemed to ripple, and for a moment, I saw Emily sitting at the piano. Her hands danced across the keys. playing a melody that made my blood run cold. In the reflection of the black piano, her face was a mask of terror. The vision passed as quickly as it came, leaving me disoriented, with a metallic taste in my mouth. That's when I noticed something on the sheet music atop the piano, a yellowed business card. Blackwood & Sons Antique Shop, where the past meets the present. I spent the entire afternoon in the police archives and the public library. The Blackwood Antique Shop was located in the heart of Greenwich Village until a mysterious fire consumed the place in 2004. The owner, Howard Blackwood, disappeared the same night, along with his collection of unique artifacts. In old photos of the shop, something caught my eye. In the display window, a set of mirrors identical to those found at the crime scenes. My hands shook as I read the records. Both Sarah and Emily had bought pieces from the antique shop weeks before the fire. On my way home, I stopped in front of the abandoned building that once was the Blackwood Antique Shop. The broken windows looked like empty eyes watching me, and the smell of smoke still lingered in the air, even after all this time. That's when I saw a figure moving inside the building, a woman with long red hair. "Sarah?" I called, pulling my gun and stepping into the building. The interior was covered in soot and shards of glass. In the center of the store, one mirror remained intact, draped in a dusty cloth. When I pulled off the cloth, my blood ran cold. In the reflection, I wasn't alone. Sarah and Emily were behind me, their mutilated bodies, their eyes black as bottomless pits. "Are you starting to understand, Will?" Sarah's voice whispered, though her lips didn't move. "The mirrors are portals, and there are 5 more. Find them before it's too late." When I turned around, I was alone, but on the ashes of the floor, freshly written words glowed like embers. The dusty file dropped onto my desk with a dull thud. "It's all we could recover from the Blackwood Antique Shop fire," said Nancy Morrison, the department archivist, her gray eyes studying my exhausted face. "You look terrible, Will. I hadn't slept right in a week, ever since the vision started." On every reflective surface, I saw distorted faces watching me, mouths open in silent screams. I had covered all the mirrors in my apartment, but still, the visions persisted. Between the scorched pages of the ledger, I found what I was looking for. An entry dated the 15th of September, 2004. Venetian set, 7 mirrors of the crossing. The buyers were listed: Sarah Mitchell, Emily Watson, Catherine Blackwood, Robert Foster, Michael Chen, Elizabeth Durant, and the last name was blurred, illegible. Something about the handwriting bothered me. It was irregular, shaky, as if the person who wrote it was in deep distress. In the margins, there were notes in Latin and symbols that reminded me of the blood patterns found in the victims' apartments. "Detective Parker?" Officer Johnson's voice pulled me out of my thoughts. "I found something about the other buyers." He placed a folder in front of me, his hands trembling slightly. Catherine Blackwood, the wife of the antique shop owner, died in the fire. Her body was found clutching a broken mirror. Robert Foster, an art restorer, fell from his window 2 days later. A broken mirror was found beside him. Michael Chen, a university professor, drowned in his bathtub the same week. Elizabeth Durant, a museum curator, had an accident in her private elevator. All the cases were filed as accidents or suicides. They all had mirrors broken into exactly 7 pieces. A sharp pain pierced my head, and the world around me began to spin. Suddenly, I was no longer in the office. I was in the antique shop, but decades ago. Howard Blackwood stood before me, his face lit by black candles. The 7 mirrors formed a circle around him, and in each one, a different face screamed silently. "The portal must be opened," he murmured repeatedly. "The price must be paid. 7 souls to open the way." The vision shifted, and now I saw Catherine Blackwood frantically writing in a journal. "He's gone mad. The mirrors have corrupted him. I must stop him before." I returned to reality with the taste of ashes in my mouth. On my desk, the files had scattered, forming a familiar pattern, the same pattern as the mirror shards at the crime scenes. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "The mirrors have chosen you, Detective Parker. just like they chose your father. Attached was an old photo. My father, James Parker, shaking hands with Howard Blackwood in front of the antique shop. The date in the corner of the photo, the 15th of September, 2004, the day my father disappeared forever. Will? Nancy was back, her face as pale as wax. T, here is one more thing you need to see. She placed a newspaper clipping in front of me. It was a recent obituary. Elizabeth Durant, the last survivor of the Blackwood incident, found dead in her home last night. Beside the body, an ancient mirror shattered into exactly 7 pieces. The date on the newspaper was 3 days ago. And Will, Nancy hesitated. Here is something strange in her photo's reflection. I looked closer, and my blood ran cold in the background of the photograph. Reflected in a mirror was... The whiskey wasn't helping anymore. 3 sleepless nights had left my mind in tatters, but the fear of the dreams was greater than the exhaustion. On my desk, the victim photos seemed to watch me, their eyes following my every move. Elizabeth Durant had been the 5th. 2 mirrors left, 2 targets, and something told me I was on the list. Go home, Parker, Captain Thompson ordered. You look like the Walking Dead. He had no idea how fitting that comparison was. I drove aimlessly through the dark streets of Manhattan, the rain hammering my car like ice needles. That's when the radio crackled, a static that slowly turned into music, the same melody Emily Watson played in my visions. The world spun, and suddenly I was in her apartment again, but before the murder. She played the piano, tears running down her face, while her reflection in the oval mirror showed her hands bleeding. They're coming through the reflections, she whispered. Howard opened the portal, but couldn't control them. Now they want to finish the ritual. The vision shifted. Now I was in the antique shop, watching Sarah Mitchell by her mirror. Howard Blackwood smiled, but his eyes were hollow, black like bottomless pits. It's a special mirror, he said. It belonged to an old Venetian family. They say it can show more than just reflections. In the corner of the shop, partially covered by a dark cloth, was the 7th mirror. And through it I saw my father watching me, his face a mask of desperation. Will, he tried to say something, but his voice was swallowed by the darkness. I woke violently to the sound of glass breaking. I had fallen asleep at the wheel, and my car was stopped in front of my childhood home. All the mirrors in the car were shattered, glass shards covering the seat. In each fragment, a different reflection. Sarah combing her hair, Emily at the piano, Elizabeth in her elevator, Catherine in the fire, Robert falling, Michael drowning. And in all of them, a dark figure in the background, watching, waiting. The same figure I was starting to see in all my nightmares. My phone rang. It was Rachel Cooper from Forensics. Will, you need to see this. I analyzed the mirror fragments from all the scenes. They're much older than they seem, possibly centuries. And T, here is more. We found DNA on the frames. Blood. Very old, but somehow preserved. And Will, part of it matches yours. The world seemed to slow down. How is this possible? I asked. But I already knew the answer. Sarah's words echoed in my mind. You are the key. A new vision hit me like a punch. I was a child again, hiding in the basement of our house, watching my father and Howard Blackwood. They were surrounded by black candles, the 7 mirrors forming a circle. The blood of the Parkers runs through the veins of these mirrors, Blackwood said. Your ancestor brought them from Venice in 1847. They were made to be portals, Will. Portals to bring back those we've lost. In the vision, my father cried. She's in there, Howard. I can see Claire in the reflections. I have to bring my wife back. My mother. They were trying to bring my mother back from the dead. To open the portal, we need 7 sacrifices. Blackwood's voice echoed in my mind as I returned to reality. 7 pure souls, reflected in the mirrors at the moment of death, and the blood of the guardian to seal the ritual. I looked at my hands. They were covered in tiny cuts, bleeding. Every drop that fell formed the same pattern we found at the crime scenes. and in the broken rearview mirror of my car for a moment, I saw my mother's face smiling at me, her eyes black like Blackwood's. The address Nancy found in the files led me to a Victorian mansion on the outskirts of Greenwich Village. Margaret Sullivan, 78 years old, widow of an antique collector. It was one of those houses that seemed to freeze time, yellowed lace curtains, furniture covered in white sheets, the constant tick-tock of dozens of old clocks. The woman who opened the door looked as fragile as porcelain, but her eyes carried a weight I immediately recognized. "I've been expecting you, Detective Parker. Or should I say, son of James?" The interior of the house was a labyrinth of antiques, each room more suffocating than the last. Margaret led me to a living room where the air felt too thick to breathe. "Your father came to see me, you know, the night of the fire." She served tea in Chinese porcelain cups, her hands trembling slightly. He knew what the mirrors were capable of, just like I knew. Just like my husband knew. Before. She stopped, staring at a fixed point behind me. In the window's reflection, I saw a shadow move, but when I turned, nothing was there. The mirrors were created in Venice in the 16th century by a craftsman who lost his entire family to the plague, Margaret continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. He discovered a way to open portals to the world of the dead, using black glass fused with something darker. 7 mirrors, 7 sacrifices, all connected by the blood of the guardian. My husband was obsessed with this story. He and Howard Blackwood. A violent cough interrupted her. When she pulled the handkerchief from her mouth, I saw bloodstains. "We don't have much time, Will. They're coming." The phone on my waist vibrated a message from headquarters. Another body found. Elizabeth Durant, the 6th victim. I looked up to inform Margaret, but she was already standing, walking toward a locked door. "I need to show you something before it's too late." The key turned with a heavy click, revealing a dusty office. In the center, covered by a black cloth, was an oval mirror identical to the others. "Your father didn't just want to bring your mother back," Margaret said, her hands hovering over the fabric. "He discovered something worse. Something about your true family, about the blood of the Parkers." The window glass exploded inward, bringing with it a gust of cold wind that extinguished all the lights. In the dark, I heard the sound of something dragging. A metallic smell filled the air. "Run!" Margaret screamed. A flash of lightning illuminated the room for a second, just enough time to see the dark figure behind her, its hands like black claws reaching out. When I managed to turn on my flashlight, Margaret was lying over the now shattered mirror, blood forming the same patterns I knew all too well. In her stiff hands, an old diary. The last pages were filled with frantic handwriting. "The blood of the Parkers is the key. They are not portals, they are prisons." Howard didn't understand. James didn't understand. The mirrors weren't made to bring the dead back, but to keep something trapped. Something that is escaping, mirror by mirror, death by death. Will needs to know the truth about his mother, about what really happened the night of the fire. The last mirror, the 7th, is the most important. It's where it all began, where Claire Parker. The rest of the page was stained with blood. In the reflection of the shattered mirror pieces scattered on the floor, I saw faces, dozens of them, all silently screaming. Among them, I recognized my mother, younger than the photos I kept, her eyes filled with a terror that froze my soul. And behind her, a shadow grew, took shape. Before I could see its face, all the fragments. The diary of Margaret Sullivan weighed heavily in my pocket as I sifted through the files in the basement of the precinct. 3 in the morning, and the only light came from my dimming flashlight. Among stacks of archived cases, I found a dusty box labeled Blackwood and Sons, 2004. My hands trembled as I opened the lid. The first photo hit me like a punch to the gut. My mother, Claire Parker, smiling next to Howard Blackwood. The date on the back, Blackwood Antiquities Team, 1994. 10 years before the fire, 10 years before everything fell apart. "You shouldn't be here, Will." Dr. Cooper's voice startled me. Rachel was standing in the file room doorway, her dark circles as deep as mine. I found something in the blood samples from the mirrors, she continued, closing the door behind her. The DNA. It's impossible, but it's changing. Like it's alive, evolving. She placed a file in front of me, microscopic photos showing impossible patterns in the blood. And T here is more. I compared it to your medical records, your blood type. Will, it's changed since your last exam 6 months ago. A sharp pain pierced my head, and memories began to flood like a broken dam. I was 5 years old, hiding in the closet of my parents' room, watching through the cracks in the door. My mother stood in front of the oval mirror, the same one I now knew was part of the cursed set. She hummed a strange melody, her hands tracing symbols on the glass's surface. In the reflection, her face was different, both younger and older, impossible to tell. The Parkers have always been guardians, she whispered. It's our blood that keeps them sealed. The file in front of me revealed more. Claire Parker wasn't just an employee of the antique shop. She was a born Parker, a distant cousin of my father. The genealogical records traced back to 1847, when Jeremiah Parker brought the mirrors from Venice to America. Each generation had its guardian. Each guardian had their sacrifice. The blood must be renewed. A yellowed handwritten document stated, the portals must be fed or they will open. Another memory. Me at 7 years old, watching my mother and Howard Blackwood in the antique shop basement. Salt circles on the floor, black candles, the 7 mirrors forming a star. It's weakening, Howard, my mother said, blood dripping from her nose. I can feel them pushing, trying to get through. The blood of the Parkers is no longer enough. Blackwood held her hands, his eyes glowing with feverish light. I've found a way, Claire. An ancient ritual. We can strengthen the seals, but the price. My mother interrupted him. Number, it's too dangerous. If something goes wrong. The next memory was from the night of the fire. The smell of smoke, distant screams. My father carrying me out of the house in the middle of the night. Don't look back, Will, he said, but I looked. I saw my mother through the bedroom window, standing in front of the mirror. She was crying, but smiling. In the reflection, dozens of black hands reached for her, pulling her into the glass. Howard Blackwood stood beside her, an old book in his hands, chanting in a language that made my ears bleed. Rachel placed a hand on my shoulder, pulling me back to the present. Will, you are. She stopped, her wide eyes fixed on something behind me. In the reflection of the basement window, a familiar figure began to take shape. My mother, just like the night of the fire, blood tears streaming down her face. The last seal is breaking, son, she whispered, her voice distorted like static. Your father tried to fix my mistake, but only made it worse. Now you need to finish what I started. Find the 7th mirror. Find the truth about the blood of the Parkers. The flashlight flickered and went out. In the dark, I heard Rachel scream. When the light returned, seconds later, she was lying on the floor, unconscious. On the wall behind her, written in fresh blood, the words that would haunt me. Blood calls to blood. The last guardian must choose, the portal or the prison. There is no other way out. Margaret Sullivan's diary revealed the final piece of the puzzle I'd been trying to avoid. The last entry dated the day of the fire. James Parker bought the 7th mirror. He thinks he can undo it all, bring Claire back. Poor fool. He doesn't understand that she chose her fate. Rachel Cooper was recovering in the hospital, mild concussion, no memory of the last 24 hours. Maybe it was better that way. What we saw in the file, what my mother said. Some truths are just too heavy to carry. I returned to my old house, abandoned now for 2 decades. The peeling wallpaper revealed dark stains that seemed to move under the light of my flashlight. Upstairs, my parents' bedroom remained untouched, a time capsule preserving the last day of normalcy in our lives. On the vanity, I found a letter addressed to me, my father's shaky handwriting. When you read this, Will, I'll already be gone trying to save her. The mirrors aren't what we thought. What's trapped inside them, what your mother tried to prevent, Blackwood lied to all of us. A new memory surfaced the morning after the fire. My father packing frantically, stuffing an old suitcase with books and documents. "We need to find another way," he murmured. "She's in there, trapped with them. I can't leave her." In the living room mirror, I saw impossible reflections, endless corridors of black glass, and in them, shadows moved like smoke. One of them had my mother's face. Another had claws instead of fingers and eyes that glowed like embers. The basement was just as I remembered, except for the smell of metallic odor mixed with ozone, like the air before a storm. The marks on the floor were still there, a perfect circle made with black salt, 7 points marking where the mirrors should go. In the center, a dark stain that never left the concrete. "Blood calls to blood," my mother used to say. Now I understood what she meant. Every drop of spilled Parker blood strengthened the seals. Every Parker life sacrificed kept the portals closed. In a locked trunk under the stairs, I found my father's journal. The last pages revealed a growing obsession. Diagrams of the mirrors, ancient symbols, formulas written in dead languages. "The blood of the Parkers is not ordinary," he wrote. "We are descendants of the original craftsmen, the ones who first trapped the shadows in the mirrors." Claire knew this. That's why she married me, to strengthen the bloodline. But something went wrong. The blood is weakening. The seals are failing. A noise made me spin around footsteps upstairs. Impossible. The house had been empty for years. I climbed the stairs, gun in hand, following the sound to my parents' bedroom. The door was slightly open, a faint light pulsing inside. In the center of the room, covered by a dusty sheet, there it was, the seventh mirror. And reflected in its surface, my father, exactly as he had been 20 years ago. "You've grown, son," he said, his voice distant like an echo. "I am sorry for what I did, for what I had to do. Your mother, she's here with me, but she's not her anymore, not completely." The reflection shifted, revealing an endless mirrored hallway. In it, I saw my father walking endlessly, following a figure that alternated between my mother and something that shouldn't exist. "The mirrors aren't portals, Will," his voice echoed. "They're prisons. Your mother wasn't trying to keep something out. She was keeping something in. Something that uses our reflections, our memories, our blood to try to escape." And now, a distant scream cut through his words, a sound that should not have been possible for human vocal cords to make. The mirror's surface began to ripple like liquid mercury. In the reflection, I saw all the victims, Sarah, Emily, Elizabeth, each trapped in their own endless corridors of black glass. And among them, moving like shadows within shadows, creatures that defied sanity. "Find the red book in the antique shop," my father whispered, his image starting to fade. "I hear is still a chance to fix this, but you have to hurry. When the last seal breaks," the mirror exploded before he could finish. And in the silence that followed, I heard something moving in the house's shadows, something that had been waiting for this moment for a long, long time. The antique shop was different at night. The charred ruins seemed to breathe under the moonlight, and every step I took echoed wrong, as if the sound came from multiple directions at once. The red book my father mentioned burned in my mind. Rachel was at home recovering, against doctor's orders, researching the symbols we'd found. "Be careful," she'd said. "Your blood pressure, your tests. Will, your body's changing. The blood of the Parkers." Fragments of mirror crackled beneath my feet as I moved through what was once the main area of the shop. The air was thick with a familiar metallic scent, and shadows danced on the walls independent of the light from my flashlight. That's when I heard it, a whisper, a distant melody. The music Emily Watson played in her final moments. I followed the sound to the back of the shop, where a partially melted iron door, burned by the fire, led down to the basement. "You shouldn't have come alone." Sarah Mitchell's voice came from every broken shard of mirror at once. Her reflection multiplied, watching me, each fragment showing a different version of her, alive, dead, something in between. "They're stronger now. Every death, every drop of Parker blood. The seals are almost broken." In the reflection of a broken display case, I saw Emily Watson sitting at her ghostly piano, her fingers bleeding as she played. "The book," she said without looking at me. Howard hid it in the most obvious place. The piano, of course. I descended the basement stairs, each step groaning under my weight. In the center of the circular room, covered in 2 decades of dust, was the grand piano where Emily used to practice. The keys were stained with dark red, not rust, I realized with a shiver, but dried blood. When I pressed the first key, all the reflections in the room trembled. The second key, a distant scream echoed. The third, the blood on the keys began to flow as if it were fresh. The melody came naturally, as if my fingers remembered something my mind had forgotten. The same notes that haunted my nightmares, the music Emily played, that my mother hummed. With each note, the reflections around me shifted, revealing scenes from the past. Howard Blackwood performing secret rituals, my mother strengthening the seals, my father discovering the truth. The secret compartment in the piano clicked open, revealing a book bound in dark red leather, almost black. The Grimoire of Reflections, the title read in faded gold letters. The pages were written in various languages, some I recognized, others that seemed older than the written word itself, but I could understand them. The blood of the Parkers, I realized, didn't just give me access to the mirrors, it gave me ancestral knowledge, memories that weren't mine. The mirrors were created to imprison the shadow. I read aloud. Creatures that existed before light, that feed on reflections and memories. But they needed guardian souls willing to sacrifice themselves to maintain the seal. The air grew heavier, and in the reflections around me, I saw all the victims gathered no longer frightened, but determined. "Your mother was stronger than all of us," Elizabeth Durant said, her reflection flickering between youth and old age. She discovered that the shadows were learning, evolving, using reflections not just as windows, but as doors. So she did the only thing she could. She strengthened the seals with her own light. "But your father didn't understand," continued Catherine Blackwood, blood still dripping from her ghostly wounds. "He thought he could bring her back. Howard convinced him that an ancient ritual could reverse everything. 7 mirrors, 7 sacrifices, the blood of the last guardian to open the portals. But the shadow, they'd been manipulating everything from the start." A cold wind swept through the room, snuffing out my lantern. In the total darkness, the reflections glowed with their own light, each showing an endless corridor of mirrors. And in each corridor, shadows moved shapes that defied logic, made of living darkness and ancient eyes. In the center of it all, a familiar figure, my mother, but not as I remembered her. Her body seemed made of broken glass and dancing shadows. Her eyes were pits of liquid darkness. "Do you understand now, son?" Her voice was a chorus of whispers. "Why I chose this fate, why your father failed. The blood of the Parkers isn't a blessing, it's a sentence. We are the locks, the keys, and the prison." And now, a sound like glass breaking filled the air, and I felt something warm dripping from my eyes and ears. Blood, I realized. My blood. The blood of the Parkers. The last seal was beginning to break. The grimoire burned in my hands as I read the last pages, stained with Howard Blackwood's blood. The antique shop's basement had become something beyond reality, every reflective surface now showing a different fragment of the past, present, and possible futures. Rachel had warned me over the phone. "The bodies will, they're changing, as if they're transforming into something made of shadows and glass." It was supposed to be a resurrection ritual. My father's voice echoed from a nearby mirror. He looked older, consumed, his eyes carrying the weight of 2 decades of regret. Howard said we could use the power of the mirrors to bring her back. 7 mirrors, 7 voluntary sacrifices, the blood of the Parkers to open the way. But we didn't understand. We didn't see that every death was weakening the seals your mother created. The pages of the grimoire revealed the terrible truth. The ritual my father and Howard tried wasn't for resurrection. It was an ancient ritual of imprisonment, reversed. The first Parkers, I read aloud, my voice trembling, didn't create the mirrors to communicate with the dead. They created them to imprison the shadows that fed on human souls. Each mirror was a prison, each guardian a sentinel. The blood of the Parkers was the lock and the key. A new memory emerged, so vivid it made me stagger. My mother, on the night of the fire, performing her final ritual. The blood must be renewed, she sang as she cut her palms. The seals must be strengthened. They cannot escape. In the reflection of the main mirror, I saw the shadows, ancient creatures made of living darkness, trapped between dimensions of glass and silver. Howard Blackwood watched it all, his face a mask of sick fascination. He manipulated your father. Margaret Sullivan's voice came from another reflection. Howard discovered he could communicate with the shadows. They promised knowledge, power, and he believed them. He convinced James that we could use their power to bring Claire back. But the shadows, her voice faltered. In the reflection, I saw her last moment, the creatures emerging from the mirror, transforming her into something between glass and darkness. The ritual my father and Howard performed that night had given the shadows exactly what they wanted, a way to weaken their prisons. Every death since wasn't just a murder, it was a key turning in the lock. Sarah, Emily, Elizabeth, Catherine, Robert, Michael, Margaret, all chosen because they had a connection to the original mirrors. Their deaths were necessary to break the seals my mother had strengthened with her sacrifice. Will. My mother's voice came from all the reflections at once. Her face was a kaleidoscope of memories, sometimes human, sometimes something else. They're almost free. Every death weakened the seals. Every drop of Parker blood spilled opened the portals a little more. Your father, he tried to fix his mistake, but only made everything worse. Now, only you remain, the last guardian, the last Parker. The grimoire revealed the final page, an ominous warning written in Howard Blackwood's shaky handwriting. The shadows cannot be destroyed, only contained. Every attempt to free them results in more prisons, more guardians needed. What Claire did, she didn't just strengthen the seals, she became part of them. Now she exists between worlds, neither alive nor dead, holding the shadows captive with her own essence. But the price is too high. A distorted scream sliced through the air, and all the reflections trembled. In the endless glass corridors, I saw the victims not human anymore, but hybrids of shadow and light, trapped in eternal limbo. My father was among them, still trying to reach something that seemed like my mother, but wasn't. The shadows had fed on their memories, their reflections, turning them into something new and terrible. The last seal is almost broken, my mother whispered, her form flickering between humanity and something ancient. When that happens, when the last drop of Parker blood is spilled, she didn't need to finish. In the closest reflection, I saw the future the shadows planned, a world where every reflective surface would be a door, where reality would fold in on itself like an infinite mirror, where humanity would be consumed by creatures that existed before light. The choice before me was clear and terrible. Follow in my mother's footsteps and become part of the seals, or try to find another way, a way that didn't require more Parker sacrifices. The grimoire weighed heavily in my hands, its pages whispering ancient secrets. Somewhere above, I heard glass breaking. The last mirror was calling, and with it, a decision that would change everything. The last mirror waited for me in my parents' bedroom, its surface rippling like liquid mercury under the moonlight. The grimoire had revealed its true nature. It wasn't just a mirror, but the original, the first. The one the ancient Parkers used to imprison the first shadow. The one my mother used for her final sacrifice. Rachel had warned me not to come alone, but she didn't understand. No one understood. This had always been about family, about blood. You took too long to understand, son. My mother's voice emerged from the mirror like distorted music. Her reflection showed all her versions at once, the mother I knew, the guardian she became, and something older, more terrifying. The deaths. I needed to get your attention. I needed you to see, to understand, what your father did, what Howard planned. It was all just the beginning. In the mirror, the images changed rapidly. I saw Sarah Mitchell discovering the truth about the mirrors, Emily Watson playing the music that opened the portals, Elizabeth Durant finding ancient scriptures. All of them pieces of a bigger puzzle. They weren't random victims. my mother continued. Each one had a role to play. Every death was a necessary step for this moment. The truth hit me like a cold wave. You chose them, I whispered. You caused the deaths. Not to weaken the seals, but to strengthen them, she completed. Each death, each drop of blood spilled, it wasn't breaking the prisons. It was creating new ones, preparing the way for what needs to be done. In the reflection, I saw the shadows writhing in their endless glass corridors, more confined, more trapped with each passing moment. My father appeared in another reflection, his face marked by decades of regret. I thought I was trying to save her, he said, but she was trying to save us. The ritual that Howard and I performed, it wasn't for liberation. It was the final part of her plan. Every death since then has been a new seal, a new prison. And now, he looked at me, blood tears streaming down his face. Now, only one remains. The grimoire opened in my hands, its pages turning on their own to the final revelation. The true purpose of the Parker blood. We weren't just guardians, we were weapons. Each generation born with the power to create new prisons, new seals. My mother wasn't trapped in the mirrors, she had become something more. An eternal prison, using the shadows themselves against them. The choice is yours, Will, my mother said, her reflection now an impossible fusion of light and darkness. You can try to rescue me, like your father did. Open the portals, weaken the prisons, or... She hesitated, her form flickering. Or you can finish what I started. Use your blood, your power, to create the final seal. Turn every reflection in the world into a permanent prison. But the price, of course, to create eternal prisons, an eternal warden was needed. My mother wasn't suffering in the mirrors, she had willingly become part of them, turning her essence into locks and chains. If I chose to follow her path, I could never return. I would be condemned to an eternity of vigilance, existing between reflections, keeping the shadows trapped forever. Rachel burst through the door, gun in hand. Will, no. T here is another way. There has to be. But she stopped when she saw my face, when she realized the decision had already been made. It always had been. From the first murder, from the first vision, from the moment the blood of the Parkers began to sing in my veins, I grabbed the nearest shard of mirror, and with a precise motion, cut my palm. I am sorry, Rachel, I whispered, as my blood dripped onto the surface of the ancient mirror. The transformation began immediately, each drop turning into new seals, new chains. I felt my essence fragmenting, spreading across every reflective surface in the world. I saw my mother smiling, proud and sad at the same time. I saw my father finally finding peace. I saw the shadows screaming in eternal silence. The last reflection I saw as a human was my own, not Detective Will Parker anymore, but something beyond, something between worlds. An eternal guardian, a warden of nightmares, a Parker fulfilling his ancestral destiny. The last mirror shattered, and with it, the line between reality and reflection. Now, there was only eternal vigilance, the never-ending duty. They say, if you look closely at a mirror at midnight, you might see something moving in the shadows. Some swear they see familiar faces, a woman with dark hair, a man with sad eyes, a young detective. But they're just stories, just reflections. And if something darker, older writhes in the depths of the glass, well, there are eternal guardians making sure it stays there. This is the legacy of the Parkers. This is the price of truth. Our story has come to an end, and with it, the mystery unravels, yet the shadows still linger. What did you think of this story? T here is still so much more to uncover, and the secrets are far from over. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next episode. The terror awaits. Until then.